Well, good. Well, it's actually late afternoon here in early Jersey. Over here on the East Coast, it's early in the afternoon for my West Coast friends. And of course, where our guest is and a lot of our people that watch the show, it's mid to late evening in Europe. But this is Material Issues. It's episode number 192. I'm Mark Hershberger of Pop Detective Records. As I said, I'm over here in South Jersey where we've had snow flurries and 22-degree temperature today. Can't wait for that to change. It is late February. We are getting there. But joining me, as always, from the left coast, the other coast, the warm Southern California confines, Mr. David Bash, the president of the International Pop Overthrow Festival. David, how the heck are you feeling this afternoon?
I'm feeling fine, Mark. Thanks for asking. Yeah, it's unlike the East Coast. It's actually really warm here, 75 degrees.
Nice.
And it's going to get back. It's going to actually get into the 80s next week. Now, of course, we have to hope for not much wind.
Sure.
If we get wind with that, with those temperatures, we're gonna be in trouble again. So let's hope let's hope it all remains pretty calm.
Are the fires actually out at this point? Because we don't hear anything more about it ever.
Well, they were. Ha ha ha. John, I think you've used that line like 3 times, and I'm not quoting shoes either. I don't know if they're completely out. A few weeks ago, they were once the first rains came down. There were reports that the fires were completely contained. Well, I don't know if contained means out or just to a point where they're under complete control.
Yeah.
That they're not going to spread anymore. Since then, it's rained a few more times and very heavily. I doubt they're still. I really doubt that they're still blazing.
Yeah.
They're probably done for by now. But again, we could.
We just don't hear about it anymore.
No, because no damage is being caused.
Yeah.
At this point, if anything's still burning, which I doubt it is, it would just be the brush away from the homes.
Yeah. In the music world, I my copy of the Badfinger Head First came in the mail today.
Oh, good.
And boy, is that a great listen, man, oh man.
I'm glad that they remastered it because that really helped. I don't think I have to be honest. I don't think it's one of their best albums, but everything's relative.
Right.
Even the worst Badfinger album, whatever that is not a bad record.
Right.
Some people,
I thought it sounded pretty good, and the story behind it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff. I have it both on vinyl. The vinyl is really nice.
Yeah,
I have it both on vinyl and CD. Really nice package. Glad that they were able to get that done. As far as IPO goes, this weekend we'll be putting the Chicago schedule together, and next week, starting on Wednesday, Rena and I will be working on the Liverpool schedule, and that takes about 4 or 5 days.
Sure.
Believe it or not, we've got 110 bands from all around the world, many of whom have restrictions, and so we have to work with that, and then along with that, try to put together lineups that, from a subgenre standpoint, from flow, make some sense.
Sure.
If we had complete power to do that, it would be so much fun. But of course, there's all the frustration is, damn, we can't add that band here because they can only play on that other day. So, whatever, we have to work with it. But no matter what we do, it'll end up being a really good time.
Always is. 20. This is year number what? 21.
21, and to sort of celebrate IPO here, I'm wearing my year number 20 IPO Liverpool T-shirt, designed by the great Steve Stanley, as they all have been. This is one of his better designs. We sold it out reasonably quickly. I'm always on stage trying to hawk the T-shirts, which is part fun, part like, oh, do I have to do this again? But, we really need to sell them.
Yeah.
And I also, the good thing is I really believe in them because they have a really nice design. And then all the names of the acts who are playing on the back.
Right, right. Yeah.
So they end up being really good souvenirs for the bands and for their fans and just general fans of IPO Liverpool.
Sure.
So we're really looking forward to getting back to Liverpool in May, where hopefully this time I will get to see my guest. I mean, since our guest, I should say, since COVID, he hasn't really been out much. So I don't know if I've seen him since 2019, which was the last pre-COVID year we were there.
Right.
But since he may not have gone out, but he's certainly been busy. And a lot of our listeners will know who our guest is. For many, many years, he's a presenter on BBC Radio Merseyside, where he's had his own show, where he's put together many specials. He's also an author of many, many books, including books on Paul Simon, Elvis Presley,
Buddy Holly.
Yep. And of course, the Beatles. He's also written books on the Cavern Club, including one that we're going to show a picture of right now, I believe.
Yeah, we've got a great picture of the great book, which the nice story behind it, which we'll tell when he comes up here about how you and I got the book. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. You were in Liverpool the year that the book came out, and we were in the Beatles shop, and we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But he also has a brand new book that we're going to concentrate on the most, and that is
80 at 80.
Yeah, there it is. Spencer Leigh, 80 at 80. It's 80 chapters of his life, basically. Different things that he's done, different experiences that he's had, different observations he's had about his hometown of Liverpool and elsewhere. And it's a really delightful read.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
And what else can I say? Well, he's one of the few people on earth who has survived Mr. Furness's canings. What a terrible thing, but that's what they did in private schools back then. So without further ado, would you please give a huge welcome to Mr. Spencer Leigh?
Glad to see you, David, again, and hi, Mark.
Hey, Spencer.
Hopefully you won't see.
It's a long time since I've been caned.
Hopefully you won't see Mr. Furness in an afterlife, because he's in hell. So I don't want you to go there.
Oh my! Oh, Spencer, how are you this evening? Are you're physically in Liverpool? Is that your locale?
Yeah. I mean, I live on the road to Southport, as it were, so about 10 miles out of Liverpool. And you can see my books and records behind me there. So this is like an office. And I've been working out of here for many years, really. And I mean, although I haven't gone out too much since COVID, I haven't been ill or anything. I suppose it's age really that's got to me, and I just don't go out as much as I do. And I really do. At the weekends, I don't like the sort of late night trains coming home, because you never know who you're going to meet. But otherwise, it's fine. And in fact, I went to Lipper. In fact, here's a program, Paul McCartney's Lipper. Can you see that? That's a play they had on Harvest last week, and I went to that. It's in the Paul McCartney Auditorium, which sounds very grand. So it's great to go to the Old Liverpool Institute. And the actors that they have there, the youngsters that are doing it, people in their late teens, early 20s, the students are very good indeed. And this was a play by Richard Bean, which covered the whole of a farming community's life over 100 years. And it gave you one of Lipper's problems, actually, in that all the students are young and they have to play old people getting on. And in fact, one of the characters lives to be 100. So, every 10 years as the play goes on, he has to be older. So they do have a problem playing older people, but the acting is actually very good indeed. And they perform with a lot of enthusiasm. And I love going there. And I've seen concerts there too. One of the best concerts I've seen in my life was when Jose Feliciano came to Lipper, and he was half singing in Spanish, half in English,
Mm-hmm.
And I don't speak Spanish, but it didn't matter because the passion was there. And I thought it was a brilliant, brilliant concert.
Yeah, I saw Jose from the roof of my parents' house in Kutztown in mid-1970s. He was in a fairgrounds that was behind my house, and I was too young to really go there by myself, which was out the door. But from the roof of the house, I could see the stage and listen to Jose Feliciano, and that's a good memory you just brought back from me. And yeah, quite.
Spencer, do you remember reading how at the Baseball World Series he did a really kind of funky Spanish version of the Star Spangled Banner, and he got raked over the coals for it?
No, I didn't. But
Yeah.
I mean, baseball means nothing to me, really.
Well, this had nothing to do with baseball. It just happened to be.
I know it doesn't, but I wouldn't sort of switch on to it. But I might look for it now if that performance is just on YouTube. I
bet it is.
Oh, it's got to be. Yeah, indeed. Well, talking about Lipa a little bit, David and I, before you showed up in the StreamYard feed here, we were talking a little bit about the rancor, as you could say, going over Paul McCartney's performance on the Saturday Night Live anniversary. Did you happen to see it?
No, I haven't seen that. No.
Well, Paul finished out the 3-hour live show singing the Abbey Road medley, Carry That Weight.
Golden Slumbers in the end, and his voice was really, really not good. I'm not going to say it was bad. It wasn't bad, but it was not. Well, the biggest problem was when he tried to
surely compared to Bob Dylan, it's good.
Yeah.
And people accept his voice as so awful as it is these days, don't they? Because it's Bob Dylan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, his voice was never all that good anyway. It was just right for what he did. But here's the thing about the McCartney performance, and you can see it on YouTube. Yeah. The problems really were elevated when he tried to hit the high notes, and especially in Golden Slumbers and Carry That Weight. But, another thing in his defense, he had done 3 2-hour shows at a very small club in New York called the Bowery Ballroom. Only a few days before, and I mean that's taxing on any musician, let alone an 82-year-old man. So his voice may have been shot simply because he had strained it by doing all those shows.
It's part of his pride that he wants to do it. I remember, I suppose about 10 years ago, interviewing Frankie Valli. And I was talking to him before the performance, and I said, I'm looking forward to the performance tonight because I love your high notes and sherry. And he said, I don't do them. He said,
he sure doesn't.
He said, you watch. He said, I may have my mouth open, but it's a guy at the back now.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing going around the internet for the last couple of months is Frankie's still out there, and he really looks like he's just standing there staring into space while these perfect high notes are coming from somewhere. And everybody's like, what's, but
he's 90 and he just doesn't. Yeah. He doesn't.
Well, I mean, I can remember in 1963, it would be, and at the Liverpool Royal Court Theatre, which you'll know, David, it was advertised that Marlene Dietrich was going to be there. And I think she was 62 at the time. And I remember thinking, I was 17, 18 at the time, thinking, gosh, what an old lady to be performing at the Royal Court. I must go and see her before she died. And I couldn't find any friends who were interested in seeing Marlene Dietrich. But I went along to see her. But now, of course, performers don't retire. They keep on going and going and going. And in fact, Tom Robinson said to me a few years ago, he said, the problem is, I haven't invested in a pension plan, so I've got to keep going. And this is it, don't you? You've got to have that forward planning. And and of course, they've lost so much revenue from royalties and things now, because the bottom has dropped out of the LP and CD market.
Yeah, indeed. Now, I think in Paul McCartney's case, I mean, whether he sounds like he did 20 years ago or whether he doesn't sound that good, it wasn't terrible. It was just the high notes were strained. It's still Paul McCartney. It's still what people grew up in the 60s and the 70s and into the 80s and the 90s. He's always been around. He's iconic. So if he's going to go out there and put on a 2-hour plus show in Philadelphia, and he's 82 years old. If I can go, I'm going to go. And I'm not going to complain a damn thing about whether his.
You know what? I give him a lot of credit for not lowering the register that he knew he could hit and trying to hit the high notes. Those are the ones he wanted to do. And
you would think, wouldn't you, that he'd say to the musicians, "We'll play this in a lower key."
Nope.
And he'd get around it a bit that way. But no, Well, that's all to his credit, really.
Well, we had Brian Ray on the show last year, McCartney's guitarist, and he just talked about McCartney's exercise regimen, his diet. He is the most energetic person that you're going to meet, and he's just an amazing physical specimen, like Jagger is. And if he wants to get out there and keep doing it, people are going to keep going.
Yeah, but Jagger's never really looked that great, though, has he?
No, not even.
Better than Keith Richards.
You're gonna love this. You know the jazz singer George Melly.
Yeah.
Well, he's quite a wit, and he said to Mick Jagger once when he was at some function with him, he made a remark about the lines on Mick's face. And Mick Jagger said, "They're laughter lines." And George Melly said, "Nothing's that funny."
One of the things that struck me in your book was that early on you saw the Stones as part of a bill with the Everly Brothers and a few other bands.
Oh, yeah.
You said the Stones weren't really any good. We're just so shocked. I've never heard anyone say that.
Yeah, well, they were getting started. They were. It was 1963. It would be only a couple of weeks after I'd seen Marlene Dietrich, actually. And this bill in Liverpool featured the Everly Brothers, Bo Diddley, Little Richard, the Rolling Stones, Judy Grant, who'd had a few hits in this country, and the Rattles from Hamburg. And it was just a magnificent show, one act after the other. Bo Diddley was magnificent. He only did 2 songs, I think, and they were both about 7 minutes long. And his guitar was going around the theatre, which was marvellous. Little Richard stripped down to his underpants, and that was quite exciting. But the Everly Brothers were very disappointing because I thought they were going to be great, but they did things far too fast. It was they were at the Odeon Cinema, which was sort of next door to Lime Street Station, and it was as though they had a train to catch. I've thought about it since then, and I think the reasons that they were doing it so fast is because they grew up in the bluegrass community. They knew the songs well, and the bluegrass people like doing the songs as fast as possible. And that has sort of filtrated through to them. And they were doing Wake Up Little Susie, in about 90 seconds. And it was a great shame because you wanted to hear it the same speed as the record. And they could have been the best act on the bill, and they weren't.
Well, that's a good point.
I have a similar story for you, actually. I actually saw Little Richard open for Chuck Berry once. Of course, this was when they're both, very advanced age. And Little Richard's doing a great show. Suddenly it's about 9:55, and he's ready to do this medley, which should have lasted about 15 minutes. Instead, he did everything really, really fast. And my girlfriend and I were looking at each other like, what's going on here? And then it finally hit me. Chuck Berry must have had in his contract, I start at 10 o'clock. Yep. And anything later, I'm going to sue you. So Richard was probably told that. He said, you better be done by 10. So he had to speed up his...
Well, have you seen Van Morrison in recent years? He comes on stage. I've seen him twice do this, and I presume he does it every time. He even did it at the Royal Albert Hall. He comes on stage and presses a button, so the timer starts, and you see this clock that says 75 minutes, and it goes down, and when it gets to 000, he walks off stage.
Oh, Jesus.
I mean, that is contempt for the audience, I would say. Yeah. He shouldn't be doing that. It may work as a joke once, but it's not really.
No, not at all. Well, that's a good question. All your years of seeing, I can't even imagine how many concerts and shows you've seen. What are some of the most bizarre things that you've seen from known acts?
From known acts, oh dear. Just so you're trying to think of, Chubby Checker, 1962.
Yeah.
The Twist was at the height of its fame there, and Chubby Checker had come over to England on tour, and I got my tickets for the Liverpool Empire on Sunday night he was on. Now, there's a Lord's Day Observer Society in England then, and they insisted that certain things couldn't be done on stage on a Sunday. You couldn't tell jokes, for example. And when Buddy Holly toured here in 1958, he had Des O'Connor as the compere of the show, who is a comedian, but he wasn't allowed to tell jokes on the Sundays. So I went along to see Chubby Checker, and the show started off fine, you see, and he did a couple of songs, and he did about 5 minutes in, and the manager of the theatre of the Empire, Neil Brooks, came on stage and admonished him and said, "Mr. Checker, we've told you that this is Sunday, and the Lord's Day Observance Society say you cannot twist on stage on a Sunday. If you twist again, I'll have to bring the curtain down." So Chubby Checker continued singing. So I reckon I probably saw Chubby Checker's only non-twisting performance.
That could very well be.
Yeah, but I mean, what ridiculous rules there were. And you had the national anthem as well.
Well, one of the things that really resonated, and it's kind of related to what you were talking about not being allowed to twist. One of the things that really resonated in your book was how much contempt the older generation had for Elvis Presley. How they just didn't get him. They couldn't stand him. They thought he was,
Not just Elvis, but yeah.
Not just Elvis, of course, but he was the king. Did the same thing happen with the Beatles when they first hit Liverpool?
Not quite. I mean, to put it into perspective, I mean, rock and roll was something new. Our parents had been through the war. Some of the parents had fought in the war, of course, and they wanted a nice steady job and a steady life with obedient children around them. And suddenly this wild music came along, first of all with Bill Haley and Rock Around the Clock, which I liked. And then Elvis Presley came along with Heartbreak Hotel. And I remember seeing in the New Musical Express, Heartbreak Hotel was coming into the charts. And I thought, that's a great title. And Elvis Presley, is there really somebody called Elvis Presley? What a fantastic name. But I didn't know any more about it than that. And you could go into a shop and hear records, but you had to be over 16, I think, to do that. They didn't just play them for kids, you see. So I didn't know what this record was like. And you didn't hear it played on the BBC. This was the downfall of Western civilization. So I remember being in bed one morning. I think I had flu one morning. And so I put on Housewife's Choice, which was at 9 o'clock, which is a program for housewives to do the housework to, you see. Pretty bland sort of stuff, the Al Martinos of the world and the Sinatras and the like. And at 5 to 10, just before the news, a clergyman would come on, and the clergyman would have a little sermon for the day. And he said, "I have just heard the worst music I have ever heard in my life. It is abominable." And he said, "I think this is the downfall of Western civilization, etc., etc." You see, really, really hated the record. And he said, "I'm going to play a bit of it for you so you can hear how bad it is, and your children are listening to this." And he put on about 40 seconds of Heartbreak Hotel. Well, I was cured from flu immediately. And I dashed down to the record shop and bought a copy then and took it home and played it and realized it was marvelous. And then the other records came along. And I do think it is almost down to us 10-year-olds, really, who nurtured this rock and roll, who loved it. I mean, I can remember Crying in the Rain coming out, and by the Everly Brothers.
Yep.
And a friend and I loved it so much that we played it continuously one whole evening. You know, we just hooked on this music, and it grew up with us. We kept it, and we kept the faith. And so I give my little 10-year-old self a little pat on the head, you know, for actually liking Elvis Presley then. I mean, this is a football mad city, of course, too. But I mean, I was gone on the music, really.
What did you play the 45s on? Did you have a little dance set, or was this a larger console for your parents?
I did have a dance set. I mean, my parents didn't have any records initially, and I was trying to get them to get a record player. And I said to my dad, I said, there's some records I'd really love to have, like Eddie Calvert, the trumpeter. He'd done a piece called The Holy City. Mm-hmm. I got some records that were abominable. I had no intention of ever playing, but I fooled my dad into thinking, oh, he likes these records. We better get one of these record players. But once it was in the house, I could then smuggle in my Jerry Lee Lewis's and the like, and really enjoy them. And they were 78s then, of course, too. Oh, yeah. I had to be careful not to break them. And if you go to the Beatles' story in the Albert Dock, mm-hmm. you can see there the 78 RMP of Lonnie Donegan's Rock Island Line, which John Lennon loves so much. And if you look at it, you can see that the center is all chipped. So that John Lennon, you know, wasn't putting it on precisely. We put it on precisely. We didn't want to damage the record at all. But he, being John Lennon, you know, plonked it on. And so it had these little cuts in the groove. So I thought just looking at that 78 tells you something about John Lennon's life.
Yeah. Oh, indeed.
How did back then in the 50s and into the mid 60s, how were you guys hearing these records? Because the BBC wouldn't play rock and roll, which of course informed the beginning of pirate radio stations.
Oh well, no, they were playing it by then. I mean, there was Radio Luxembourg, but the reception was pretty poor on that. Oh, okay. But I mean, we bought records and we played them over and over again. We didn't want something new every 5 minutes. No, and lots of people bought different records and we swapped them around.
Oh, wow.
And it was just marvelous. I mean, it was like a secret society. Our parents hated the music, of course. I didn't go to the rock and roll films until Loving You in 1957, which was Elvis Presley. Right. I was 12 years old. My mother said, "Yes, you can go to it, but you've got to make sure that no teddy boy knifes you while you're in there." You know, it was scary stuff, I suppose, really. But that's the way it was back then.
And how did they feel about Cliff Richard?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, Cliff at the time was quite a sort of sexy singer, really. I mean, he had all the movements. I mean, the guy who really had the sexy movements was Billy Fury, who comes from this city. And he, I would argue, is the best-looking pop star that Britain has produced. I mean, he had the classic look, Billy Fury, magnificent. And he had a song called Wondrous Place. Now, Wondrous Place was originally recorded by Jimmy Jones, who made Handyman.
Yeah.
But if you hear Billy Fury's version, he slowed it right down. It's just like Elvis Presley's Crawfish, but it's a love song. And Billy Fury would come on stage with a single spotlight on his face. And he'd have a cigarette. And when it got to A Wondrous Place, he'd just flick the ash. Hardly any movement at all. Everybody would scream. I knew, in later years, I knew Billy's mother, Jean Wycherley, pretty well. She lived in Liverpool. I saw quite a bit of her. And she told me that whenever Billy was in the Northwest, she'd go along and see the concerts. And I said to her, "But what were you doing in those concerts while all these girls were screaming at Billy Fury? What were you doing?" And she said, "Oh, I was screaming too." which is lovely to think of your mother screaming at you.
Yeah.
But Billy Fury got a lot of bad press over his stage movements at first. And his father, who hadn't been to see him on stage, got him in the living room and said, now, Billy, just show me what you're doing on stage. It's getting all this publicity. But he was sexy with it. Cliff always seemed to be rather wholesome. So although he was doing the movements, it didn't really look sexy. Right. And Marty Wilde was too big and awkward, really, to get away with those movements. But, I mean, Cliff was certainly very good. And Hank, of course, was great. Hank Marvin is his guitarist. I mean, they were a really good group. And Cliff had a few management problems at first. I mean, you find these things out later on. And there's a story that he was managed by Tito Burns. And Tito Burns asked him if he'd do a charity gig on a Sunday night, which he did do. And at the end of the concert, the person who was organizing this charity gig said, it's very nice for you to do this charity gig for us, Cliff. Thank you very much indeed. And he said, here's the reduced fee that we agreed, and gave him £300, you see. And Cliff didn't think there was a reduced fee at all. He was doing it for nothing. So he went home and said to his father, I've just been given these £300 for this show, and I thought I was doing it for free. And he said, well, Tito Burns is trying to cheat you. And they went around to Tito Burns the next day, and Mr. Richard, or Mr. Webb as he was, sacked Tito Burns there. But, I mean, these managers, I mean, the reason they managed young people was because they could con them, really. That was it. They wanted a business that was full of young people who were naive as such.
And they still do, Spencer.
Well, indeed, yes. And some years ago, I interviewed Rod Argent of the Zombies. And I said to Rod Argent that my program went out on a Saturday night. And I said, one of the listeners to the program is normally Chris Curtis of the Searchers, and he's bound to ring me when he hears me talking to you. And he said, tell him Tito's got our money as well. Tito was kind of a lovable rogue. And I did, when he died, I wrote the obituary for him in the Independent newspaper. And a couple of days later, the Independent forwarded me a letter that they'd had in, and it was from Tito Burns' daughter. And I thought, oh dear, I'm in trouble for telling these tales here. And she actually sent me a lovely letter saying, we knew what he was like. It doesn't matter at all. We're amused by it. So there we are.
Amazing.
By the way, I think the handsomest UK pop star was Barry Ryan, but that's just me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, he married a princess, didn't he?
He did?
Yeah, in Saudi Arabia. Yeah.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I think he's still alive, no?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, yes, he is. And I suppose about 15 years ago now, I gone to interview him at the Liverpool Empire when he was on an oldies show. And I went in there, you see, and it turned out, now, just going back in time, Dave D had been ill, of Dave D. Dozy Beaky McIntitch.
Yep.
And the Independent had asked me to write his obituary in advance. So I'd written it, and that was a couple of months ago. And he made some sort of recovery. And I went into Barry Round's dressing room, and Barry Round said to me, have you met Dave D? Because Dave D had come in to see him because he lived in Chester. And I thought, gosh, should I say to him, nice to meet you, Dave D. I've just written your obituary. So that was a bit of it. I didn't say that, of course, but it's a bit embarrassing. You don't expect to meet the people you've written the obituaries for.
Right, yeah.
Generally not.
Don't expect to show them up. Yeah, that's well, Michael McCartney checking in from Hawaii. Would like to say hi to Michael, a great DJ a friend of ours out of Hawaii, checking in. But Spencer, what a great time though to grow up 50s and 60s in and around Liverpool, with so many venues, so many artists, so much going on, so much change in the music business. I mean, you were right there at the right age, at the right time. To just and you soaked it all in.
Well, yeah, I was quite studious, so I didn't go to as many things as I would like to. And also, I mean, we still obeyed our parents in those days. I mean, nowadays kids wouldn't listen to their parents at all, would they? They just do what they wanted to do. But you know, my mother said the cavern is a dreadful place. You mustn't go there, and so I went there a couple of times in the 1960s, much to my shame, and I wish I'd been more, but I didn't. We listened to our parents, and I saw the bands as they came into Crosby, because a lot of them played in Crosby, in St. Luke's Hall, which was known as a jive hive, and that had a great sprung floor. And that was really good, yeah. And so bands like King Size Taylor and the Dominoes and Rory Storm and the Hurricanes would play there, and they were really good. And that was nice because it was a gig where I could just walk home.
When you saw Rory Storm and the Hurricanes with a drummer known as Richard Starkey, did you think he was particularly impressive?
I didn't see him with Ringo Starr.
Oh no!
I didn't see him with Ringo Starr. At least I don't think I did. But it's just one of those things. I saw the Beatles twice in 1963. I saw them on the Roy Orbison tour when they came to Liverpool, and that was great. And Orbison was very good too. And one of Orbison's band later told me that Roy Orbison, you know, he didn't know what he was walking into, that this band was going to be so big, you know, and he'd not heard of them before he got off the plane. And he said to one of the band members, he said to all the band, he said, pianissimo. So they went on stage and he just sang A Candy Colored Clown, They Call the Sandman, did it very, very quietly. And if he did that very quietly, people stopped screaming to hear what he was saying. And then as soon as they stopped screaming, he put up the volume and he was away. So he was someone who actually knew how to deal with the Beatles, really. So the Beatles did very well, and Roy Orbison did very well.
I got to tell you, Roy Orbison, one of my all-time favorites, but that is probably, if I had to rank all the live performances I've ever seen of anybody, I saw Roy Orbison at a Valley Forge Music Fair in a revolving stage. I was third row. I went to see Carl Perkins thinking that, all right, Roy Orbison's also playing, but I can't wait to see Carl Perkins. I left that night saying Roy Orbison has the greatest voice I've ever heard in my life, and completely blew me away from that point on. I've never been that blown away by a show than what Roy Orbison did.
Wow.
With his voice. Yeah.
He was wonderful on stage, and when I was backstage talking to him, this is many years later, and he'd had his heart operation, and he said to me, "Do you want to see the scars?" And I was thinking, "Not particularly," and he just opens his shirt up.
Oh, no. Well, the fact that you weren't at the Cavern too much, as you said in the book, if you went to see the Beatles at the Cavern, you didn't see the Beatles because there were so many people, you probably couldn't see them.
Well, I mean, these books are often written by people who don't know the size of the Cavern and the like, and they say 1,500 people saw the Beatles that night, which is a load of rubbish, because you know from the Cavern now, the first part of the Cavern is an exact recreation of the original Cavern. That's the exact size that they worked to. And you can't get more than 500 or 600 people in there, and that would be a real squeeze.
On that side, God, I could not.
And in fact, you've got the archways, so you're only going to have a few hundred people who could see the Beatles every night. Right. But you get the impression that many thousands of people did. There's a very interesting guy in Liverpool. He's actually older than me, and there aren't many people older than me in Liverpool. And he's a guy called Ron Watson. He was a politician, Sir Ron Watson he is actually. And he saw the Beatles over 100 times before they went to America. So he saw them time and time again at the Cavern, and he's got notes about it, and it's wonderful. I mean, that's a fantastic sort of history that I hope doesn't go with him. You know, I hope somebody does a really, really long interview with him. I've done a couple, certainly.
Debbie Greenberg claims to have seen the Beatles all 292 times. Do you think that's true?
I'd like the proof of it. There were a couple of nights they appeared at the Cavern that I don't think it was last minute things for them. So how did she know that they were going to be there? And they appeared 292 times, and every time she isn't going out that evening somewhere else or doing something else.
Right.
She might have seen them, but that many times. But I doubt she'd do the whole 292. I mean, I know her father ran the Cavern, but of course that was after Ray McFall, and it was in Ray McFall's stewardship that the Beatles appeared there with the wonderful Bob Wooler as DJ. Did you meet him, David?
I have not. I don't believe I've met Bob yet. I really want to.
You never will until you get up there. He died. Yes, he died about 2002.
Oh, really?
Well, I wasn't even there until 2003.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, he was wonderful, and he had great phrases for every occasion, which were known as Woolerisms, the jokes, and I collected them over the years, and I did a book about him, actually. And when I was doing a book about him, I remember saying to him, Bob, we've got to have some new Woolerisms in the book, because there are people who know all these old ones, and they want something fresh. And he said, I'm too old for that now. I'm too ill. I can't do it. And the next time I saw him, which was in Keith's Wine Bar, he sat down and he said very quietly, and suddenly he said, John Lennon went from rage to riches. Is that good enough for you? That's a perfect Woolerism, which it was. But he was a very, very funny guy. And he wrote that piece in Merseybeat that the Beatles were the stuff that screams are made of, and that was about 1961. So he was really ahead of the pack, and he suggested songs to them. They didn't always take them. He wanted John Lennon to sing "I Only Have Eyes for You" for some reason, but he had an effect on all the People's repertoire. The Hippie Hippie Shake, which wasn't a hit in this country, but he'd got a copy of it, and he played it a lot at the Cavern, and the Swinging Blue Jeans, of course, did that.
Yeah,
did it very well.
Maybe one day we will interview Bob Wooler, because we plan on taking this show into the afterlife and calling it Material Reissues.
There you go.
That's good. That's good. That's a Woolerism.
It's a Wooler.
One of the things I learned in your book, well, there were a few things that I really was kind of surprised at. Number one, that John Lennon never went back to the UK once he was in New York. That's shocking to me.
It's surprising, yes, but I think he would have done. I mean, judging by comments, it looks as though in 1981 or 2, he would have done some sort of world tour. I think the promoters, he'd have had quite an argument with the promoters about the role Yoko would play on stage in that world tour.
Sure.
You know, if you're doing it, and I should think that'd take some negotiating, but I'm almost certain that he'd want to play Liverpool. It just is in the same way. Whenever McCartney does UK dates, there's always one in Liverpool.
Right.
Yeah.
No. One of the things that really impressed me about the book, I know you kept notes about concerts you'd been to, but was a lot of what's in there, I mean, especially the stuff having nothing to do with music, was that all from your memory, or did you have a regular diary as well?
I had journals on certain things that I knew were funny or interesting. I'd got notes on. When I was with comedians, Ken Dodd doesn't mean anything in America, but he was regarded as the funniest man in England, and I saw quite a bit of him. And whenever he came out with one-liners to me, I kept those one-liners so I could do a chapter in the book on Ken Dodd on jokes that people wouldn't have heard. And it shows what he was like in normal conversation. And there were a few people that I did that with. I'd sort of think, this is a good remark, I'll keep this. So I built up stuff over the years. But one of the I wanted to write, well, how it started was I'd done quite a few music biographies, and I'd done Dylan and I'd done Sinatra, and I was asked to do David Bowie, and I was thinking of doing it, and I got a lot of stuff together, and I thought the problem with him is that whatever he's doing, he seems to be play acting. He knows he's in a play, you know, just like the Beatles song says, and that's the way he is. And so it's very hard to get through to the real man. What's he really like? And then I thought, well, when it comes to me, I know exactly what I felt at all the stages of my life. And I thought perhaps I can do a book about some of the things I've experienced, some of the backstage stories, and also write about my time in insurance, because I spent my time as an insurance actuary, just sort of trying to make that entertaining too. And I realized that one of my bosses at the time, around, well, I suppose the late 80s, early 90s, was actually a dead ringer for Donald Trump in the way that he behaved and wanted things. So he'd bark out orders to you early in the morning, and you think, if I do this, this is lunacy. And in the afternoon, he'd say, have you done it? And he'd say, I didn't mean it. Or he'd say, well, it doesn't work. Don't do that. And you had to sort of balance it and say, am I going to do this or not? Or will he have forgotten about it completely? You're almost a nervous wreck dealing with this guy. It's very hard to anticipate, really, to second guess. And he also had a mirror in his office where you always tried to position yourself so you had the mirror behind you, because then he'd always be looking at you because he was looking at his reflection, you see. So, you're Trump, isn't it? And therefore, I thought I can have some fun with this. I can tell some insurance stories and have this guy as a character. And that's what I've done in the book.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking about a bunch of different books here. We're kind of bouncing around, but while we're on this subject, I want to pop the graphic up.
This is the one, yeah.
Yeah, it's the latest book from Spencer Leigh, 80 at 80. It's out there on Amazon and all the online places. You can get a physical copy. You can download for Kindle, which is something anybody can do. But it is fascinating. It's 80 years and 80 chapters and 80 just so much stuff. And what it leads me back to my question to you, Spencer. Your writing is so kind of effortless to read. It's a very easy reading style, which is very enjoyable. Where did you learn writing? Are you learned in journalism and writing, or how did this come about? How did Spencer Leigh become author Spencer Leigh?
Well, I've always written things, and I mean, I've had to write quite a lot of things for work and the like. And you always want to have it that if I'm talking about writing, I always say, you can't just write for yourself. You've got to write something that makes the reader want to read on. You've got to get their interest. You've got to see what they would make of it. So you, whatever it is, even if in fact, I did a couple of papers for the Institute of Actuaries, quite learned papers. And I think I was the first person to be quoting rock artists in there, at the top of the chapters and things. But I thought that was a good thing to do. And so I've always sort of merged cultures and things like that. But I mean, I like writing, certainly. I like finding the right words to describe something. And I enjoy doing it. And when I took redundancy from Royal Insurance when it merged with another company, because what would have been my job would have been half in Liverpool and half in Bristol. And I thought, well, I mean, I know distances mean nothing to you Americans, but 200 miles is a lot to me. And I felt I'd always be in the wrong place when I was wanted. And if I could get out with a good redundancy package, I would. And fortunately, that happened. And then on the Monday that I'd retired, as it were, and thinking, what am I going to do next? I got a phone call from the Independent newspaper because I knew one of the obituary writers, Steve Vose. And they said, Steve has been telling me that you've taken early retirement from insurance and you might be available to do some obituaries. And I said, oh, thank you very much. And they said, well, we'd like to test you out. It's 11 o'clock now. We'd like 1,200 words on Laverne Baker by 1 o'clock, please. Wow. And I thought, gosh, right. And I thought, if I do this right, I'm in. And so I just did it. And from there, I did hundreds of obituaries for the Independent. And I always enjoy doing obituaries, you know, trying to sum up somebody's life, to picking out the pertinent things you want to talk about and relating it to the personal things in their lives as well.
Even for people who are still alive, yeah.
Yeah, there's been quite a few of those, actually, over the years. I don't particularly like doing them for people who are still alive. And, of course, they may go on and do something else that makes you want to change things anyway.
Right.
But, I mean, there are some quite big names, actually, that I've done obituaries for that The Guardian has got at the moment ready for printing when they go. But this happens. That's the way it is. It means that if somebody dies, you can get a nice obituary published the next day. You know, if somebody hasn't had to research for several hours.
Sure. Yeah. Now you've written books on Paul Simon, on Frank Sinatra, Elvis, Buddy Holly, the Beatles, which covers a lot of 40s, 50s into the early 60s. Are there artists that you really wish you would have written about? Are there any that are favorites of yours that you still kick around that I wish I would have done this?
And are there any that you would still like to write and you can?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm open to offers. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there are people who didn't have hit records and there isn't a market for the book. And I know that I can't do it. I mean, my favorite singer-songwriter is John Stewart. I just thought he was wonderful. In fact, I've got about 70 albums of John Stewart's. In fact, and I did his obituary for the Independent when he died. But, I mean, he's known for writing Daydream Believer, but there's a host of great songs. And he had such a great voice that, I mean, even if he was just reciting the shopping list, it was magical. And he was a lunatic character, too, because he traveled on the road with a dentist's drill. And this is true. And if somebody said, "Oh, I've got toothache," something, he said, "Hang on, I'll have a look."
Oh my God! And he had no training in dentistry.
Oh no, it was just interesting. It was his hobby. This is it. When you get to know people, they do have their odd little quirks, certainly, and they don't know that they're quirks necessarily.
The book you wrote about British pop before the Beatles is fascinating in and of itself. What really kind of was going on before the Beatles kind of changed everything, and so that's kind of why where my question came from was, and you just answered it. John Stewart being your favorite artist of all time, which is very, very interesting. But there are so many great artists from back in those days. I just think about you have the rockabilly stuff, the Elvis, the Beatles were influenced rockabilly. Buddy Holly, I'm a huge fan of. But
we had skiffle as well. You didn't have that.
Yes, we didn't.
Rodney Dannigan was great.
Does your chewing gum lose its flavor on the bedpost overnight? That was kind of a hit here.
Yeah, that was an old song from the 1920s, and he did rock Alan Line as well, which is a great Leadbelly song. And I mean, I heard that song when I was 11. I'd never heard of Leadbelly, of course. It was just a song about a train for me, but it was such an extraordinary record because it lasts 2.5 minutes, and the first minute of it is just this narration as he's building up, waiting for the train to build up steam. So it was a very strange record to be a big hit, actually. And Lonnie was Lonnie was someone who wanted to write his own autobiography, but he had problems because he thought the value of the autobiography was worth a lot more than it actually was. And so quite a few publishers turned him down, which is a pity because I wish he had written that book. But he was great right to the end. Even though he'd had numerous heart attacks, really, he still gave his all on stage, and he was a great person to be with. I mean, immense fun, but very, very critical of absolutely everyone.
Well, it's kind of like the Dave Clark syndrome, where he kept thinking his catalog was worth so much money, and he wasn't going to release anything, and then. Now it's kind of like, outside of the hardcore fans, who cares anymore? His opportunity has.
Don Kirshner had the same issue. He's held on to certain things, and now all his fans are dead.
Yeah.
Too long. Now, one thing I have to say, one thing I really loved about this book, that as much of a music fan as I am, I actually liked your slice of life stories at least as much, because some of them actually resonated with me. And one of the ones that did, unfortunately, was the time you were accused by the police of making all those prank phone calls to that guy, where of course it was really obvious that you hadn't. I actually had a similar experience. I'll make this brief, but I parked, my roommate and I lived in northern New Jersey in the early 80s. I parked across the street in a spot that was kind of iffy. It turned out, and then the next morning I found that my car had been towed. I was told to go to the local police station. And when I got there, the cops started grilling me saying, we have this ticket that was put on the car, and it's written and there's a whole bunch of profanity written on it, and we think you did it. I said, what? I had not seen the ticket, nor would I ever write that kind of profanity. I said, let me see that. And it said really, it was awful stuff. And I said, I'll tell you what, just like you said, I will I'll show you my writing. It's nothing like that. And I would never write anything like that anyway. And so I wrote, and they said, well, you're not writing in box print. I mean, it's the same thing that you were going through, where these cops are saying stuff and you're just so astonished. Like, what the hell are they talking about?
Yeah.
Finally, the sergeant came out and he said, look, we all think you did it, but we don't have enough evidence against you, so we're going to have to let you go. But it's like police do that even in America too. They try
they made a bargain with me and said if you say you're guilty, we'll see you get off with a fine. But I thought if I did that, then the next time someone was making threatening calls or something, they'd go to me first. So it was ridiculous. But it wasn't me at all. And I said, can't you send a tape of my voice and a tape of this call to a voice expert somewhere and have it analysed? And they agreed to that, and it went off. And the person at the university said nothing to do with him. So it was just absolutely ridiculous. Yeah,
it's great. Well, I mean, again, as your writing style is fantastic. You've got over 20 books that you either authored or co-authored. Very, very prolific. And I love this 80 at 80. The idea of taking 80 years and starting virtually from the beginning and all the way through your life and the stories in 80 chapters is just really, really good. And as I said, it's out there. You can get the physical book that David is holding up right there on Amazon. And I've got it on Kindle right now, but I've got the physical book ordered. Fantastic. I highly recommend anybody going out there. And if you're a Beatles fan, which most of us are, all the books on the Cavern, on the Beatles, on British pop before the Beatles, all fantastic as well. So, I mean, if they're not familiar with your work, Spencer, I highly recommend, as you told me, just go to Wikipedia, put in Spencer Leigh. You'll see the whole list of books that you've done. And that's where I started. And then I just started going out and researching everything, and a lot of great books out there.
And again, I have to thank you again very, very much for devoting a chapter to international pop overthrow in this book. We had gone to Beatles shop.
The IPO is in 80 at 80 as well.
I'm trying to find it. I don't see it.
Oh, I'm sure I put it in there. I mean, I deliberately didn't put an index because I didn't want people.
I know, I read that. Of course, that was the first place I went, and I saw it. I knew I was going to go there.
I didn't want people to miss out on the insurance stuff and the like. I mean, my favorite chapter in the book is sometimes you can have a chapter that just lasts a couple of paragraphs, but it's so funny. And that is, we were talking about old people who made it prior to the Beatles, and one of them was a pianist called Russ Conway, who had #1 hits with Side Saddle and Roulette. And by the time I knew him, he'd hit sort of bad times, and he was playing variety clubs and the like, but nothing very much. The magic had gone, really.
Yeah.
And he couldn't afford a manager anymore, so he decided that he'd have a manager. And he called him by his real name, which was Trevor Stanford. So if you wanted to ring up Russ Conway and make an interview with him, you rang this number, and Trevor Stanford would answer the call and say, "Hello, Spencer, how are you? Okay, you want to speak to Russ? You want an interview with Russ? Well, that will be okay when he's in Liverpool. He can do it next. I'm sure that'll be fine. I'll just check on him, though. He is here with me at the moment." And then he puts the phone down, and you hear the little steps as he goes to find him. And then he sort of goes, bop, 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 bop. You hear conversation in the background, and then he comes back. And then Russ comes back and says, "Hello, Russ. Hello, Spencer. Trevor told me that you were you'd rung up and that you wanted an interview with me, and that's fine, you know." So he had this sort of double life, and it's quite sad, really, I think.
Yeah,
Spencer, of all your interviews that you've done, and you've done a ton of interviews, was there one particular interview that you were extremely nervous about?
Not particularly. I thought Billy Bob Thornton might be a strange one to, and indeed it was, but for the reasons that I didn't expect, because I did this interview with him, say, at 5 o'clock, and he was going to be on stage at 8 o'clock, and he'd been out in the afternoon. He was playing the Cavern, and he'd been out in the afternoon on a ferry across the Mersey, and he'd been with Jerry Marsden, and Jerry Marsden said he was going to come to the show. But Jerry Marsden wanted to see Liverpool Football Club play and couldn't get down till 10 o'clock. And Billy Bob was going on stage at 8 o'clock. So Billy Bob said, "Okay," he said, "I'll wait until you come. I won't start until 10 o'clock. And I said to Billy Bob, "You mean to say you're going to have the whole audience in here at 8 o'clock and they're going to wait 2 hours for Jerry Marsden, one person in the audience, to get here?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, this is a football city, isn't it? They'll understand why I'm doing it." And I thought, no, they won't, but they had to, you know. So, you know, that is a strange behavior, really.
Oh man, but no celebrity that really I don't know. Let's say you were kind of frozen in front of. I don't think David and I really get in awe of people, so to speak. We prepare for interviews like you probably did. We do research. We get it in our heads. But sometimes you meet somebody where you're just like.
When I met Brian Wilson, I had an out-of-body experience. I was watching myself interview him because I couldn't believe that this was really happening.
I can imagine that. I remember going to interview Glenn Campbell at the Liverpool Empire, expecting just a normal interview with him. But that morning, there had been a piece in the Daily Mail newspaper which said that Glenn Campbell was a woman stealer and he was with Mac Davies, his wife, you see.
Mhm.
And he was furious that the British press was writing this about him. And I was the first journalist he'd seen after this was published.
no.
And so it was just a rant about British journalists, and I didn't get an interview with him that time, but I did get an interview with him the next time he came to Liverpool, and in fact he played the bagpipes for me.
Oh, that's great.
Very nice, very nice. No, I've loved a couple times that I've been to Liverpool, the Cavern with International Pop Overthrow with David. I've had a couple bands from my label perform at the Cavern, which was wonderful. And actually the Deadbeat Poets, which are former Stiv Bader's Dead Boys. Frank Sessage is actually watching live right now on the show. But yeah, one of their tracks was played many times at Anfield, the Liverpool football club. No Island Like the Mine, no Ship Like Beer, and that became an anthem there. So that's my tie-in to Liverpool. With,
there's a great guy who picks the music at Liverpool Football Club, George Sefton.
That's the man. That's the guy who did it.
Yeah, and he knows how to plug records. He really is good.
Well, I met him outside of the Cavern. He came down to an IPO show, and he loved the Deadbeat Poets, and he said, I gave him the CD, and it was a couple weeks later. He said, we got this in heavy rotation during the games. And I was just blown away, and fantastic. But nothing like Liverpool. If you haven't been to Liverpool, everybody got to get to IPO.
Like Liverpool, and even more so, nothing like the Cavern. And Spencer, did you hear about the honor that was bestowed upon me last year?
I didn't. I don't. What is it?
Do you have the vote? Yeah. They awarded me a brick on the Wall of Fame.
Oh, right. Oh, very good.
For 20 years of bringing bands to the Cavern.
Yeah. Well, they need to have all the other bands on there, don't they? They need more space, really. Because, the idea originally was to have all the bands who played at the Cavern. And that doesn't happen now. No. And they've got to find more space to do this.
Now it's just the most famous bands that have played recently.
And you, of course.
And me. Well, I'm one of the few people who wasn't a musician. I guess the DJs there also had bricks.
Of course, if you do a book, $1 Million Bash is a great title, isn't it?
There you go. I love that song, especially by Fairport Convention.
Oh, they do a great version. They're still going, Fairport Convention.
I know.
Yeah,
I love that. Mark said you were going to try and stump me with some trivia. I'm ready.
Oh,
you got it.
Yes, you. Well, I heard about this Stump the Bash, and I thought, right, I will stump you.
I'm sure you will.
Because stump has a different word. It has another meaning in England too, because you could be stumped out in cricket.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So can you name me a couple of songs, say 3 songs that are about cricket?
I don't think I could name you one about cricket, actually. I'm sorry.
3 songs about cricket.
3 songs about cricket.
And anybody watching, if you know songs about cricket, post it up here in the comments. We'd love to hear it. But 3 songs.
Big Six by Judge Dredd. No, I know that's not.
Oh, no. Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, there's a wonderful song by Roy Harper called "When an Old Cricketer Leaves the Crease."
Okay.
Which is about someone dying when an old cricketer who's giving up the game. Wonderful song. Clifford T. Ward. When Clifford T. Ward got multiple sclerosis, he sort of wasn't going out anymore. And the songs that he wrote are very interesting because they're all about what he sees on TV. And he watches a game between the West Indies and England. And he wrote a song called Cricket about that.
Oh,
and then on the Empire Windrush, the Empire Windrush that came in 1948 and brought the immigrants from the West Indies into England.
Okay.
Very, very famous ship. It transformed British society. And one of the people on that ship was actually Lord Woodbine, who was a mate of Alan Williams's.
Right.
And so he plays his part in Mersey Beat as well. Well, they had quite a few calypso singers on there. And In fact, I'll just show you this. Can you see that there?
Yep.
That is Lord Woodbine coming into Liverpool, coming into land with the Empire Woodrush. That's his boarding pass.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah, but that I had not. I know who Roy Harper and Clifford T. Ward.
Yeah. Well, anyway, one of the calypso singers. They all had names like Lord Kitchener and Lord Woodbine and the like. But one of them recorded a song called "Cricket, Lovely Cricket." And that was about West Indian cricket. So you've got that song about West Indian cricket. You've got Clifford T. Ward, and you've got the Roy Harper one too.
We're gonna. He's already stumped you, David. So we're gonna have to have Spencer back on a monthly basis to play something nice. He's already.
What it is, Spencer, is he asked me questions about Billboard songs that made the Billboard Hot 100 between 1965 and 1975, and I have to identify them based upon the questions. And so I'm gonna ask him to do one where it's only UK hits to see if I can do well on that, because I do. I have all kinds of books on UK hits, and you mentioned Clifford T. Ward, and I think of Gay, which was didn't even sniff the charts in the US, but was top 10 in the UK.
And
here's one for you, Spencer. In the beginning of your book, you talk about the shoe store owner named Mr. Webster, and immediately my mind went to a song from the late 60s. Do you remember what band did Mr. Webster?
I guess off the top of my head, I'd say the Kinks, but I don't know.
That does sound like a Kinks title, but no, it's the Monkees on their Headquarters album. And the interesting follow-up to that is the last song on that album is Randy Scouse Git, which was a big hit in the UK under alternate title. But in the US it was called Randy Scouse Git and wasn't even a single here.
Yeah, well, the reason for that, there was a TV series called Till Death Us Do Part, which was about a family that was always feuding. And Warren Mitchell, who played Alf Garnett, would say to Tony Booth, an actor from Liverpool, actually, who was playing his son, he said, "You're a Randy Scouse Git." Meaning, that he was always after the girls, and he came from Liverpool. And the Monkees heard that, and I don't know who was it. Mickey Dolenz who wrote that song. Can't remember.
Well, he sang it.
I know he sang it, but I think he might have even written it too.
Maybe he and Nesmith too.
Yeah.
And I know that they heard this phrase in England and took it back to the States with them and thought it was fun, and it was a great little record. That.
Oh, well,
it took me years until I understood what even the title even meant.
And here's another cricket reference you'll love. And this shows how an American can adapt to cricket, because Pat Boone came over here in 1957-58.
Right.
And he got involved in a charity cricket match. And the captain of England was somebody called Ted Dexter. And he was playing in this charity cricket match too, and was batting. And Pat Boone caught him out. So Pat Boone actually got out the England cricket captain, and that's pretty good, even though it was a charity match.
Wow.
I'll tell you, are you a cricket fan, Spencer?
Oh, I like cricket. Baseball isn't for me. I mean, I went to a baseball match in Canada, and you have sort of 20 seconds or something, and then everybody goes out and gets a drink or something, and then they come back for the next 20 seconds. It didn't seem continuous at all. And cricket is, 2 hours at a time. That's great.
Well, that's what I've tried hard to understand cricket, and that's just a sport that I just can't quite grasp why they play for 3 days. and I just don't understand just like it took me years to understand rugby or Australian rules football. I was like, well, why are they doing that? Why is that even? And cricket kind of works that way for me. I've tried really hard. I just don't get it. That's not saying it's a terrible sport. I just don't get it.
I enjoy watching it, but I don't understand it fully either.
Well, try that Roy Harper song, "When an Old Cricketer Leaves the Crease." It's magnificent.
Who's your football team?
Who's my football team?
Yeah.
I suppose Liverpool, but I mean, I also want Everton to do well as well. And if they don't do well, I actually support the Northwest doing well. So I want Manchester to win. So I've got a strange outlook, really.
No, you've got a really good team.
Just for one team, but you know, I really am for the area. Someone wrote a nice review of 80 by 80 and said Spencer Leigh has written a hosanna to his hometown, and I thought that's quite nice, because that's what I have done, really. I think, if nothing else, I think my love of Liverpool comes through in this book.
It very much does.
And that's the book right there. I want to show it again. That's Spencer Leigh's new book, 80 at 80. It's fantastic. It's what we've been talking about throughout this program. It is available. Go out to Amazon. David's got the physical copy in front of him. You can get it on Kindle. It's great. It's just if you want to look at a life in music and broadcasting and just a life. This 80 at 80 is fantastic. I look forward to 90 at 90 too. That's what I look for.
Well, I hope I'm around to talk about it.
Yeah. When you get the book, especially look for the chapter Just Like Starting Over, because you'll learn some things about John Lennon.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
That was a very intriguing chapter, Spencer.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. Thanks. It's been great to talk to you.
You too. It's great to see you again, and I really hope to see you in May. When we're there for IPO.
I'll be there. I'll see you then. That'll be great.
Awesome. Well, Spencer, best wishes with the book 80 at 80. And I'll tell you what, as we told everybody, check out Spencer's complete lineup of all the books he's written, especially if you're a Buddy Holly, Frank Sinatra, Paul Simon, Beatles fan, Elvis. A lot of great books out there that Spencer's been a part of, and 80 at 80 just is the latest one. And we hope there's more from the mind of Spencer Leigh, because
I have a feeling
really enjoy it. Spencer, have a great rest of your late evening in Liverpool, and hope to see you again. Talk to you soon.
I'm going to watch an episode of Yellowstone now. So
there you
great.
go.
Cheers.
Take care, Spencer. Thank you.
Cheers. Good night.
Good night.
That was a lot of fun.
He's such a fun guy. In this book, again, you know, the thing that for me that resonated were more the non-music stuff, because I experienced many of the things that he did, but that one experience in Lodi, New Jersey, with the cops.
Yeah,
I didn't mention this because I didn't want to take up too much time, but I had told the cops. Well, my roommate told me that I could park in that spot, and the cop says, "What's your roommate's name?" And it was a Jewish name, so I mentioned it, and he says, "Oh, are you Jewish too?" I thought, "Oh my God, I really wish I had a freaking lawyer there with me."
Yeah.
I just said yes and let it go, because what am I going to do? You know, the guy would have put me in jail if I did any. So thankfully it all ended well. But it was I mean, cops, they still do that. They will try to intimidate people into making a confession, even if they might not have done it.
Yeah. Oh, indeed. I have my own thoughts on policemen, although, you know, I have friends that watch this show that are policemen and things.
Some policemen are great.
Some are fantastic. There's also some that the power goes to their head, and you know, they're automatically better than you just because they're a law enforcement.
Those desk cops are probably bored, especially in the city like Lodi. So it's like, okay, I can have some fun today. Let's just fuck with this guy for a bit.
But that was a great interview. I mean, Spencer has written a lot of books, and if you're a Beatles fan, especially, his Beatle books, Beatle related books.
I'll need to get more of his books for sure.
Yeah, there's a number of them out there, and he really does well. And you know, all those years on the BBC as a broadcaster, all the interviews that he's done. I mean, he's seen a lot of people play. He's interviewed a lot of musicians. It's just quite a life at 80 chapters at 80 years old. That's pretty cool. Cool.
It really is. So we got some cool guests coming up as well.
Yeah, we do.
And I think I mentioned this last time we were on. Well, by the way, we'll be back on Wednesday at our usual time for the foreseeable future.
Right.
It just worked out better for Thursday, and especially because Spencer's in the UK, making the time a little earlier. But, we see that a lot of people were here. So thank you to everybody who adjusted their schedule to join us. No, it's not, Michael. Trust me, it is not. Early on, I think the first few shows we did where we didn't even know we were going to have any guests, we were both dropping F-bombs, mainly me, and also a lot of rude jokes.
We had our period of rude and lewdness, and then we also, some of our early guests said, well, that fucking guy, oh, can I say that? And they were we said, I guess we could say whatever we feel like.
It me, yeah. But, anyway, next week's guest came by serendipity, I suppose. Well, we can't do anything about that. Well, we can set you up with someone who'll curse for you all day for $500.
That's right.
Anyway, I went to NYU and I took a philosophy class by a professor named Bob Gerland, and he was really, really great. And I used to hang out with him after, during his office hours, and we talk about baseball. He was a huge Tigers fan, even though he was from New York, and other things. And we really bonded. And I met up with him again in 2001 when I went back to New York for IPO. And he was still, at that point he was in his 70s, but he was still spry and all kinds of stuff. Well, anyway, I wanted to see if he was still around and if he was on Facebook. So I looked him up on Facebook, couldn't find him, but I did see a post. I did see a post from another gentleman who had played with Bob Gerland in a blues band, in a fun blues washboard kind of band. In the early 60s. Bob was a jazz trumpeter, but I guess he also played in this band. Also in this band were, by the way, John Sebastian and Maria Muldaur, among other New York luminaries. Anyway, the gentleman who made that post was Steve Katz, who was a founding member of Blood, Sweat, and Tears. The band American Flyer had produced all kinds of bands in the 70s and 80s. So I knew who he was, and I did a friend request for him on Facebook, and he accepted. And I contacted him and asked him about Bob and the video clip, which we'll show next week when we're interviewing him. But because Steve is in this as well. Anyway, I talked to him a little bit, and we got friendly. And I said, "Would you like to be a guest on Material Issues?" And he agreed. So on the 26th, Wednesday the 26th. We will have Steve Katz as our guest.
Nice.
And he seems like a really, really fun and interesting guy. What I also found out peripherally was that somebody is doing a documentary on Bob Gerland. It's called The Bronx Socrates. What I didn't realize is he's one of the most famous philosophy professors in the country now.
Wow.
He's not teaching anymore, but he became that. He was somewhat known when I had him as a professor, but over the years, he really gained currency. So a documentary is being done. He's 91. There's a trailer on, I don't know if it's on YouTube or somewhere else on the net, but it has some recent interviews and other, stuff in the past about him. And so I'm hoping that, once we interview Steve, that maybe, he'll put me in touch with Bob and get him and the documentarian on.
Cool.
No, Bob used to shoot from the hip. I mean, he really did. His classes were so much fun because he'd go off on tangents and he wouldn't hold back. And talk about guys who were dropping F-bombs. Yeah, he didn't. I mean, I remember the first time I met him in his office hours, I had a problem with another philosophy professor named Professor Unger. Who was completely uptight. So I was relating that to Bob, and he said, "Oh, Unger can be a jerk off sometimes." This is him talking to a student that he barely even knows, at that point. But that's how he was. So I bet even at age 90, he's probably more irascible now that he's
probably
90.
Yeah.
And there's probably like, why the hell should I even hold back anything?
Right.
So I'm hoping we can get him. But anyway, so
that'd be fun. It'll be fun.
Steve Katz will be fun too, and we'll have him as a guest next week.
Next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday. The following Wednesday, which will be March
5th.
5th. Yes. Yeah. Coming out in just a few days on Omnivore is a new compilation on the Beckys, which has their wonderful album, the only one they did, which is my second favorite album of all time, by the way, and a disc of demos of some song. Yeah, there it is. Good to know the Becky stories on my favorite label, Omnivore. And it should be out in a few days. Like I said, you can order it online now. But the demos disc has some songs that ultimately made the album and some that didn't. We're going to have a couple of members of the Beckys. We're going to have Scott Trusty, who was one of the vocalists, Mike Abel, who's a bass player, and I just found out a few days ago that Gary Hodgson, the other vocalist, wants to join us. And so that's going to be great. So we're going to have the two vocalists. Unfortunately, we will not have Michael Brown. He passed away. He would have been somebody I would have loved to have had on the show. I did get to meet him one time, and he was really nice. But just having the two singers, we'll talk about their experiences in rock and roll, the Beckys, Michael. Should be a lot of fun.
Sorry, had to lean over there because the puppy came in and jumped up on me a little bit and then ran away. I couldn't get her on air. But that's it on the 5th. Yeah, the Beckys. That's gonna be really cool.
It will. And
two more. Yeah.
Of course, we have all kinds of irons in the fire.
Yep. I gotta do a little shout out to my friend Ben Gollum, who has watched the show here every once in a while, but he's been for the last few years working on a Chris Bond documentary. Of course, Chris Bond, big producer of Hall & Oates, everything in their prime, and of course he produced Endangered Species, the last Klaatu album, or the second to the last Klaatu album, and he passed away a few years ago. But I have one of the only known audio interviews with Chris Bond in my possession, and Ben has licensed that from me, and came and actually did an interview with me locally here last year. But today he just told me that out of all the interviews he's been doing so far, he got two people that he was trying really hard, but he finally got to interview John Oates about Chris Bond, because he said he wouldn't do it, but he finally rescinded and did it, and Kenny Loggins. So he just did interviews with Oates and Loggins, and that's that whole documentary is really coming along nicely. So congrats Ben. It's going to be very cool down the road.
That does sound cool.
It does sound cool.
And of course, that brings up the age-old musical question: Kenny Loggins or Dave Loggins? Who's your favorite Loggins?
My favorite login is when I come on my computer in the morning and start it up. But yeah, no, that's the way that we roll here at Material Issues. Sometimes we have a couple of weeks where it's just David and I playing music, talking music, stumping the bash, which David did get stumped. Oh, he's over 3 on cricket songs tonight.
Yeah, that's.
But
I got him with a Mr. Webster, though.
Yes, you did.
I was sure he would know it. Also,
yeah. But and then all of a sudden we have this is a number of weeks in a row here, like 5 out of 6 weeks, just great guests. We got 2 more weeks coming up with fantastic guests. So if you're here, we thank you so much for just kind of going along with us for the ride. Please tell everybody, if you haven't subscribed at YouTube, materialissues.com. Please do that and let everybody else know that that's where you can see all the archives. This is 192 episodes now will be archived out there at materialissues.com, which is very cool. So we're quickly approaching 200 episodes, tiptoeing our way to number 200, which makes me kind of go, wow, that's pretty cool. It's been a fun ride so far.
A lot of fun. We've had, when we first started, like I said, we really hadn't envisioned what this was going to be. It could have been anything. And then, after a few episodes, we thought about getting guests, and, it just sort of caught on. Our first few guests were all people who were local to LA. And then it was like, well, let's try and get some people from the past. And and we did. And I mean, some of the people we've had are pretty amazing. We've had, people who've had top 10 hits on Billboard, #1 hits on Billboard.
Yep.
We've had people who are legends of power pop. We've had people outside of the music, especially episode 95.
Yeah.
And,
We've had athletes. And episode 95 is an athlete.
Yeah.
Episode 95 was an athlete in one sense.
Of a different kind, yeah.
But and if you want to know who episode 95 was, go out to Material Issues on the archives and check it out. We won't give it away right here. But now we've had authors and actors, celebrities, musicians, and the like.
Yeah, and then sometimes Mark and I just talking about, and lately I've been playing a lot of new releases, and even since the episode we did last week, I've gotten in quite a bit of stuff. So whenever we do the next one, I'll have lots of things to play.
Yes, indeed. And I really think we're gonna have to set up a 60s and into the early 70s UK chart program and have Spencer back on for half an hour to go mano a mano with you on 60s.
I think I would lose to him because
yeah,
I do know a lot of songs that charted in the UK that didn't chart here because I bought a chart book in the late 70s, and I, of course, I had to find the records that were in there that I didn't know. And then you couldn't find them on the radio. You had to find them in record shops. So sometimes it was a struggle. But I learned a lot and heard a lot of amazing records that I was really sad that were never even, given the light of day here.
Yeah, indeed.
We're talking about, well, for example, this one did chart here, but not nearly as big as the UK. I was mentioning Barry Ryan, Eloise by Barry Ryan, which is a really big orchestrated, very dramatic number. Not too much unlike MacArthur Park, but maybe even more so. And MacArthur Park, of course, was huge here. But Eloise just didn't make it here, but it made it huge in the UK. And he had a lot of other huge hits that were similar. But I mean, I love that kind of stuff. But I don't know how well I would do with obscure clues on some of those. Even the labels probably wouldn't help me too much, but who knows?
It would just be an interesting time to do something like that, especially if we get Spencer to join us a little bit.
Have you ever heard a song called Johnny Reggae by the Piglets?
I don't
think it reached #3 in the UK.
Really?
I want to say early 70, either 71 or 72. See that again, I'm not too clear because I didn't hear it when it came out, but find it on YouTube and play it. The lyrics are amazing. I mean, there's Johnny Reggae by the Piglets.
Oh, Johnny Reggae.
Reggae. And actually Johnny Reggae, I think, is a phrase commonly used in the UK about a certain kind of guy. I don't remember exactly what kind, but maybe he was just somebody who loved reggae and dressed the part and was immersed in the culture. I don't know. But you should listen to the lyrics of that, and you'll see why it would have never stood a chance in the U.S.
I'm writing it down right now.
Just find it. It's got to be on YouTube somewhere, or even Spotify or whatever, because there's a huge hit over there. But anyway, that would be fun doing the Stump the Bash UK.
The UK.
You gotta give me some leeway and maybe not have to get 15 points on that. Maybe 10. I mean, because that would be tough.
Yeah. Well, I'll look and see how tough it is, and we'll make.
Do you have a book? It's kind of. I mean, you can find the information online, but it's a little bit difficult unless you have a book where you can reference quickly.
I'll figure something out. It'll be fun.
Yeah.
Well, that was a heck of a show. That was really good. I really
enjoyed
Spencer talking with him. And
I think we got more likes and loves than we normally do.
We normally do. Yeah, people were digging it.
Yeah,
people were digging it, and that's very cool. So I'm glad that was a good get, David. Another good one. He's a good guy and great writer. I hope everybody go checks out his stuff, especially if you're a Beatles fan. Plenty of Beatles books out there, really good.
Well, my favorite get of yours will always be the Two Association guys. Man, did that, because I love that band so much, and I didn't think I would ever meet both Gary and Jim, but wow, they were great. And thank you so much for getting them. I mean, wow.
It's funny. I keep all these things are archived, but I also keep a little notebook, not only to my right here that just says what's happening for tonight that I can reference, but I keep a little notebook of every episode of who's been on it. And just the other day, I was just kind of flipping through and I was like, oh yeah. We had, and then I got to the association page. And I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah. Then I got to Jim Stafford. That was one of my favorites.
That was a great one too. Yeah.
And it was like, oh my gosh, these are people that, when I'm young, I'm in the 70s, just they're iconic to my life. I know iconic is that word I use, but I grew up watching the association on variety shows and Ed Sullivan and I grew up loving Spiders and Snakes and Jim Stafford and seeing him on variety shows. Back in those days, we talked about Spencer seeing rock and roll shows where they had 5 or 6 acts. Each one came out and played 2 or 3 songs. Right. I mean, how awesome! Come here, girl, come here. How awesome would that be today to be able to go to a concert and see 5 or 6 acts on a bill, each coming out and doing 2 or 3 hit songs, and this is Audie, everybody. She's a little puppy that doesn't want to be in my lap right now. But but it's the same thing with television. Variety shows in the late 60s and the early 70s were so great because of all the guests that they had on. And that's one of the reasons you don't see that stuff on DVD or whatever, because the licensing is next to impossible.
Yeah.
Each show had 2 or 3 big names. You can't get that. You can't do the licensing. And I miss variety shows, something awful.
Yeah, that's another one. Happy Days is a show that I don't think did they ever do a full run of that? Because
I don't think so.
The first season, the cost to get those tracks was so prohibitive.
Yeah.
And I know in certain cases they would use alternate tracks, which fans would just be up in arms. I remember, I think it was the Wonder Years was another one where they couldn't get tracks, certain tracks, because they were too expensive, and they used different tracks sometimes. Yeah. Which worked well in the scenario, but still people didn't remember it that way, and they weren't happy. But yeah.
And what's amazing about those shows, especially like Ed Sullivan, I grew up watching Ed Sullivan every week. My parents had it on, and I was a kid. Now there's some TV channel that plays, all the Ed Sullivan shows and whatnot. And I was sitting there watching it the other day, just in the background. And there are things that I can remember from the mid 60s. I can remember the episode, and I haven't seen it since then. But as soon as it came on, I'm like, oh yeah, this is when and I know it. It's just so ingrained in whatever deep recesses of your mind,
right?
That this pulls back out, 58 years later. I remember that. I remember when that happened.
I know. Sometimes I'll see stuff on YouTube and it'll be in my memory and it'll match my memory, which I'll be amazed at. And then there'll be other times where it's like, really, that's what happened?
Yeah,
I'm totally wrong.
But all those great variety shows from. And then
there's also What's My Line. Now think about What's My Line. Think about over the years the level of stars that they had.
Yeah.
I mean, they had just about all the biggest people.
Yeah.
And they paid them virtually nothing to be on. At that time, they saw it as promotion. It was normally people who were in New York doing a Broadway, or a new movie was going to come out in the theaters. But they didn't get much money, and they didn't care. Now, I mean, I know that evening talk shows get some pretty high-end people, but not as consistently as What's My Line.
On an everyday basis, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was really amazing. I mean, Lucille Ball, Bob Hope. I mean, how much bigger were you going to get? And they were getting people like that
all the time.
It was such a different time in some
And
ways.
how great of a show! Like, think of a show like To Tell the Truth.
Yeah.
You know, that was one of my favorites. You know, you just get three normal looking people, and one of them happened to be a circus lion trainer. You know, and
Right.
then the other two had to kind of make up shit, and you knew they were
really good at that, which made me wonder. They must have done something prior to being on.
I think I read somewhere.
Well, they didn't know what questions they were going to get, though.
No, but I think I read somewhere that they were kind of told a bit about what this person does, you know, and how to go about, so they could speak.
They had to be.
They could speak semi-intelligently about it, as they had to lie through their
teeth. Not only speak intelligently, but not stutter or waver or nothing like that. It was very eloquent and.
But it's always great. It's like, and what do you actually do for a living, person number one? And they'd be like, oh yeah, I'm a school teacher. I teach phys ed or something. And they had
nowhere near. Yeah, I work for an insurance company.
Yeah, and they were just really good at
in a lot of cases they were. Yeah, a lot of cases the panel got fooled.
And the best part was the end when they had to go.
Oh yeah, the fake stand up. that used to, as a kid, that fooled me a lot.
See, you know, people that are of a much younger age don't understand how great TV was back there when we had limited choice of channels. It's you true. Know, address completely.
I never saw that one. I've seen a lot of them, but not that. That's great.
True, Michael. But you know what? We had limited channels, and you know, every Thursday night or Friday night or Saturday night, you knew what was coming on. I was a huge fan of Red Skelton. The Red Skelton Hour was one of my favorite things. Flip Wilson, you know, all those, the Dean Martin variety.
Yeah, and they always had, as bit. They had huge people, way more consistently that today's nighttime shows can get.
One of my favorite books. I have a book on Dean Martin and Dean Martin's Variety Hour, and how he hated to rehearse, so he didn't rehearse. And the guest stars would come in and they would rehearse with a stand-in, and then Dean would walk in on the night of the filming, and they would just film, and that's why he laughed all the time and made stuff up and was just ruined a lot of sketches in a funny way because he just didn't know what he was doing.
No, and people loved that because
and they loved it.
They liked that Dean was like a buddy.
Yeah,
he never seemed above everyone like Frank Sinatra or
exactly
some of the other Rat Pack people. He was always like, he was a buddy. He was someone that you could see having over at your house and shooting the breeze. But that, of course, if there's any show that informs its time and could never be on now that Dean was involved with, and you know what I'm going to say, those celebrity roasts.
Oh my God.
Boy, I think we've talked about this briefly on another episode, but man, the stuff that they said back then, the stuff that people like Don Rickles would say, and he was on the dais quite a bit.
Oh yeah. And and everything they would used to say to Sammy Davis, and Sammy would take it all in good.
Well, here's the thing, and I always wondered about that. The people who were the people of color who were celebrities. You always wondered, like, they always seemed to take everything in good humor.
Yeah.
Now again, it was a different time, and you could usually tell when someone was kidding and when someone was serious. But even if they were kidding, there had to be some times where it rankled some of these people because they knew that they were still caught in this time where, they were being denigrated but they couldn't show it. Mm-hmm. So, when they would make some, like when, for example, when Don Rickles would say to was LaWanda Page, who played Esther on Sanford and Son.
Right.
Yeah. Come over Tuesday. You can clean my house then, And she would just be cracking up, but internally, was she really? But the one guy, I always like to say this, the one guy who was on there who didn't go along with it was Will Chamberlain.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody would make a joke about his color. He would not laugh because he wasn't an actor, so he didn't know how to go along with the program. Yeah. So he was probably not happy about some of the stuff that was said to him.
Yeah.
All the others, Sammy, as you mentioned, Sammy Davis Jr. and anybody else who was on there, they would just crack up at things that were said about them. That, people of today, kids, like parents and kids of today, they'd be horrified if they watched those shows. I mean, literally, they would not believe what was being said back then.
It wouldn't exist today.
No, it couldn't.
It really is of its time. And
if they did watch it on YouTube, I mean, it would be more like, oh, really? They got away with it? It would be more like, they'd be shocked. They'd be appalled in many cases.
But I miss those. I mean, I miss those days. I look back on all that great television from the 60s and the 70s. I mean,
we're really fortunate in that a lot of that stuff has been preserved. Some of it hasn't.
We're fortunate, as we said in previous episodes, we're fortunate. I think I'm very fortunate to be the age I am because I grew up knowing of the greats or seeing the greats on variety shows and things, from Bob Hope to Dean Martin to Frank Sinatra to everybody. And then, we had great music in the 60s and into the 70s. You discount some of it, but we had great television as well, and the choices weren't so much that you when you bought an album, you played that album for 2 or 3 months because it was the album, and you studied it, and when you watched a TV series like the Partridge Family or the Monkees or whatever, every week you made sure to be home at that time because there was no VCRs to record anything. You didn't know when you might see the rerun if you missed it. And I planned my life around some of these TV shows.
But here's the interesting thing about it. I mean, we were watching, beyond the Partridge Family and the Monkees and things, we were watching a lot of adult shows when we were kids, like those variety hours and even, some of the dramas on television. It's like younger than yesterday really applies. I was so much older then. I'm younger than that now. And in so many ways, I feel that way.
Yeah.
I'm watching with my dad and we're both cracking up at the same thing. That's what I just said, John. Maybe you missed it.
I might have just missed his comment there. He might have said it when you did, but yeah.
Maybe he commented before I did. Yeah. Will was not an actor.
Yeah.
So he didn't know to go along with the program. And I don't know that he probably wouldn't have, even if they asked him to.
And just like that big book of, cartoons that we've referenced, a couple of years ago on the show, we're just remembering cartoons, and I was like, oh my God, I completely forgot about that. There are shows that pop up on YouTube from the 60s that I go, oh my gosh, I haven't thought of that in a million years. And I know, John, I'm a little slow tonight. Puppy concerns. But that's awesome, because then I go back out and now I'm rewatching entire series from the 60s and 70s I completely forgot about. And the magic's still there, still there.
It's so much fun. And this is for another time, but I've been watching all kinds of old bowling matches from the 70s and 80s on YouTube. Oh man, some I remember, some I didn't. I can watch them again and again. It's just how it is.
It's fascinating. That's good. All right, my friend, I gotta feed the pupper and get her outside here. She's actually come in here 3 or 4 times and gave me a little nudge.
Is that what you're calling it now? Feed the puppy?
Feed the puppy. That's what I call it. Yeah.
Michael, if you're still here, that was a lot more like our early shows.
Yeah. I smoothed the calluses, as they say.
Right.
All right. Everybody, we'll see you next Wednesday. Oh yeah. Old game shows. That's what we just talked about. To tell the truth. Everything. It's just really great. Yeah. Next Wednesday with that's the 26th with Steve Katz, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and yours truly and his truly, David Bash, Mark Hershberger, Material Issues, materialissues.com. Everybody have a great evening. We'll see you next week.
Stay safe, and if you're on the East Coast, if you're driving, definitely be careful.
Love to Rena.
Love to Ches and Audie.
And Audie, there we go.
Yeah.
Cheers, everybody.